Okay, there's a lot going on. That means there's a lot to cover. And I didn't want to do anything like this until episode 1 of the Liberty Offensive was out, because that's the kind of the bedrock of the show. It's the foundation. It's the first impression. It's kind of the crash course, right? It's like if you go to college the first day, you got to get your syllabus and you meet the professor and you kind of get your first impression of what you're about to get into. And that's why I wanted episode 1 of the Liberty Offensive done before I did any kind of, let's say, lab work, right? Because also in a course, say your chemistry course, you'll have a lab. And so you'll take the things that you're taught in the classroom and you'll go apply it in the field. And you'll see firsthand not only how it works, but how to do it. You can validate this stuff for yourself and see it. And unfortunately, we're going to have to put the cart before the horse because there's too much going on. And the only reason episode 1 of the Liberty Offensive is not done already is because I waited so long to do it. And so there's no fault other than my own. The world really is forcing me to get started right now. So that's what we're going to do. So I want to show you this first before we do anything else, because we're going to come back to it later. But this is kind of setting the table, so to say, for everything that's going on right now. I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to break down to you how this war in Ukraine is very, very real for Russia, okay? But it's not real for the West, all right? And if that doesn't make sense to you, that's okay, because I'm going to explain it. But we're going to come back to this later. Okay, but I just want to show you to start things like this, okay? Because I don't actually have time in this episode to break down all of the fake news and narrative that's been coming out of Ukraine. I can't do it. It would take too much time, and I'm too late getting into this to start going down that rabbit hole, so to say. There's plenty of other videos and other resources you can access that have done this already. But just as a buffer for what we're about to get into, a lot of the stuff coming out of Ukraine is fake. I mean, it's fake videos, it's fake photos, it's all, this stuff is so bad, guys. And here you have an elected representative doing the same thing. I mean, first of all, Snake Island didn't even happen that way. I mean, these guys were used as a rallying cry for morale because they refused to go out without a fight, right? And they all died to these Russian forces. When in reality, they're all still alive because they surrendered. And just like the ghost of Kiev, I mean, this guy doesn't even exist. He was completely made up. There was also the story about the Iron Man at Kiev. It's like this guy strapped a bunch of bombs to his chest and he blew up this bridge. It's like they're making all of these Avengers, right? All of these superhero kind of hero guys out of these acts, these heroic acts. And it's just being so westernized that it's so obvious. I'm going to show you how this all works eventually, but right now I'm just kind of giving you the buffer. Like I said, even this woman right here, he talked about, oh, we've got 25-year-old women and they're making Molotov cocktails to fight back old Putin, right? Well, if you would have followed up with her, I mean, she actually did make those, and I would show you the video if I knew that I could without getting the video taken down. But as she proceeded to throw these out of the window of her car at the Russian APCs, she caught herself on fire and has second-degree burns. And that's not any different than the nuclear power plant, right? Remember the whole debacle over that? And it's going to be 10 times worse than Chernobyl if it explodes. First of all, this guy's from Reuters, okay? You have to understand, guys. All right. Number one, these things are quite literally made to withstand 747s smashing into the side of them. I mean, these things have like 5 meters thick concrete and steel. I mean, they didn't just build these things without the careful consideration of what was inside of them. Okay. I mean, the only reason Fukushima happened was because despite being split in half by an earthquake, the backup power failed. I mean, you don't understand how safe these things actually are. There's just a lot of fear because if something does go wrong, obviously it's bad. But these things, look, this is all garbage. Because first of all, it's telling you that the Russians are attacking these things, and God dang it, they're not just killing everybody. They're about to bring on nuclear holocaust too. But if you watch the video of what actually happened for yourself, this is real time, by the way. This is not slowed down. This is not slow-mo. This is real time. Because this is just a flare falling in the street. All right? You see one had already fallen here. You can see the smoke coming up. This is the building that ended up catching on fire. It's an administrative building. So the narrative was that they were shelling, right? That was a look, here it goes out. That they're shelling this power plant. And nothing could have been further from the truth. In fact, you can look at the map overhead where the camera was right here. Okay. And this is where you just saw those flares fall into the street. All right. And this is the building that caught on fire. It's actually a training center. All right. That got hit by one of these flares. It was just kind of a caught on the side of the action. And here are all the reactors up here. All right. So this is the kind of stuff you have to understand, that it's all being maximized for propaganda. All right, that's all it is. It's propaganda. And if you don't actually take the time to go look at stuff like this yourself, if you don't actually go open up a map and verify this stuff from camera angles yourself, I mean, you're not going to know, right? And how would you know, right? Because everybody in the media is lying to you. And here's where it starts getting meaningful. It's because if you can convince everybody that Russia is evil and that Putin is the next Hitler and that they have to be stopped, that no matter what, there's no price high enough, right? There is no cost. Then you can get everyone to support canceling this entire country. And here's a list of some of the companies that have already done that. They've already pulled all their business out of this country. 150 million people just lost all of these services and all of these products. By the way, these same companies just lost 150 million customers. Right? Nobody wants to talk about that, but we'll get to that part too, because that's very relevant as well. But you have to understand something, guys, that Russia is a massive exporter of major important things like oil and gas, raw products like metals and minerals, wheat, potash. This stuff is extraordinarily important to our global ecosystem, okay? And when we cut this stuff off, when we isolate Russia, whatever Russia has done, guys, is inconsequential compared to what we're about to do to ourselves, okay? And we're going to get to that later, but we're going to keep moving on because there's even more. Look, we're now setting up to seize Russian property. Just look at this nonsense here. Look at the precedent we're setting up. What precedent exists anyway to do this? To seize property from quote-unquote Russian oligarchs to provide cash to Ukraine. This is... Guys, please don't tell me you're getting fooled by this, right? We're stealing now in the name of justice. We are labeling an entire nation of people, an entire culture as evil. And we're taking their stuff and we're giving it to the people we deem worthy. Of course, if we really wanted to hit Russia, we would cut off their oil and gas exports. If we were to do that, the consequences to the world would be substantially greater than any consequences posed on Russia. And so you can begin to see how fake this all is. Because while this war is real for Russia, it's fake for the West. And we're going to keep digging into that as we go along. Stick with me. So how are things going over there? Well, the latest map from the Institute of the Study of War shows us. So Putin is simply surrounding the areas he wants. He's not interested in Western Ukraine. He would be if he could do it, but he can't. It's too many resources. You have to have too many boots on the ground, withstand insurgency and blah, blah, blah. It's expensive and it's just not going to happen. He's going to stay east of the river and he's going to get it. This was over the day it started. This whole westernized version of the war you're seeing on TV is purely for the sake of propaganda. It's to make you feel like Ukraine had a chance and that there was a reason to rally. And you had to rally because there was a good guy who was getting oppressed by a bad guy. And since there's a bad guy, you got to do whatever it takes to stop the bad guy. And since we can do whatever it takes to stop the bad guy, that means we can cut them off of global markets and anything else we want to do because there's a narrative that supports it. You understand? So all Putin is actually doing is, instead of going in like the United States does and carpet bombing schools and hospitals and destroying all of the infrastructure just so you can roll in a few tanks for a few weeks, he is planning to hold this stuff. Okay? He wants Kiev. He wants Kharkiv. He wants all these major cities because he wants to incorporate them into Russia, or at minimum, he wants to demilitarize them. I think Putin might be okay if Ukraine stays neutral, but it can't be westernized, right? That's his problem. That's his beef. And if you haven't listened to Putin's invasion speech yet, to hear out of the horse's mouth his reasoning for everything he's doing, then I would encourage you to go listen to that. Now, his reasoning was rather lengthy and it's very complicated. There's a lot of history starting all the way back from World War One, a lot of the policies and agreements that came out of these wars. But the crux of it, in the end, at least recently, was the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Now, what the hell does that mean? Well, why would he say that? And I can show you. You see, it starts here with the Azov Battalion. Now, the Azov Battalion is a neo-Nazi, self-identified group in Ukraine that started in 2014 that posed a legitimate, serious risk of instigating a color revolution in Ukraine. And there is precedent for this. Also, you can follow the money. This group is funded entirely by the West. It also received backing from Ukrainian government. Okay, so this neo-Nazi faction special battalion not only received financing, guns, equipment from the West, it also received support from the Ukrainian government. Okay, funded primarily by oligarchs, Igor Kolomoisky. Guys, pay attention because it gets worse. These pictures are all verifiable. You can search them up yourself. It's not exactly a secret. You're just not hearing about it because in the fog of war, so to say, or in any time really, this happens all the time. This is daily in media, but you're only going to get one side of the story. You're not going to get both sides of the story, okay? This is the growing group in Ukraine, funded by the West, backed by the Ukrainian government, that Putin was talking about when he said the denazification of Ukraine. And you can go listen to his invasion speech if you want, and he lays it all out for you. And if you want to see proof of the pudding of this, I would just encourage you to do a quick little search and see how black people are being treated when they're trying to leave Ukraine, because they're being denied access to buses and they're being denied exit altogether. Some of them are reporting that dogs and cats are being preferred over them for seats on the buses to leave. And there's precedent for this, guys. This is not he in Putin's mind. And by the way, I'm not saying he's a good guy or he's vindicated. I'm just trying to share facts with you that you likely don't know for yourself, because if you don't go out and investigate these things for yourself, there's no way for you to know because the media is not telling you. And that's the point of all this, right? And there's precedent for this because in 2004 you had the Orange Revolution. All right, so you go back to 2004 and you had an election where the pro-Russian candidate won. Right? He won the election. And then the West, the United States in particular, funded and orchestrated the Orange Revolution, which was an uprising of the populace that got the election overturned into another secondary election where the results were reversed. And so in the mind of Putin, you have another color revolution in the making, with this neo-Nazi group being militarized, by the way, creating an opportunity to create even more dissidents, anti-Russian citizens. And of course, none of this is a secret. You can go look it up yourself. I mean, it was funded and organized by the U.S. government. It goes on and on and on. There are endless sources for this stuff. It's not a secret. It's just the kind of thing that the news isn't going to teach you. Of course, if you dig, you can find relevant information. Leaked audio in 2014 exposed the West meddling again in Ukraine. Now, what happened in 2014? I think we just talked about it. Oh, it was the birth of Azov, that neo-Nazi group. And so what we got was leaked audio from a U.S. ambassador discussing Ukraine, proving that the U.S. was attempting to meddle in Ukraine and perception, and to create animosity towards Russia. And you can see even the Reuters article here, it clearly plays into the Russian accusations that the West is meddling in Ukraine. And what people don't know and don't understand is that for Russia, this war is real. Because in the mind of Putin, right or wrong is irrelevant. In his mind, understand the fact that his perception is that Ukraine is not only being militarized. In fact, just before the invasion, Zelensky came out and said, hey, we're going to join NATO and we're going to build nuclear weapons. Okay. He came out and said this in public. You understand? And remember how we reacted to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I just want to put that in perspective. So Zelensky comes out and says they're joining NATO and we're going to have nuclear weapons. Okay. So in Putin's mind, he has to come in and demilitarize the potential uprising. He has to stop a color revolution. And he has to stop NATO from putting nukes on his border. Okay. Meanwhile, the West knows how Putin is going to react because he's been saying what he would do for years. If you look right here, this Institute for the Study of War has an infographic on Putin's mindset and his public position over the years and kind of the ebbs and flows of how he's felt and what he said that his country is going through in his relationship with the West. And this really matches up very, very well with what Putin said in his invasion speech. And this meme right here captures it perfectly. Right? It's like the West, Ukraine says, yeah, I'll do it. I'll face Russia. And the United States is like, yeah, you have my sword. You have my bow. You have my axe. And of course, they all send him all to go fight for himself and die because what is Ukraine to the West? It's not an ally. It's just a puppet. It's a means to an ends. You understand? They don't actually care. It's like all this propaganda coming out about supporting Ukraine and all these people are losing their families. Look, these people are leaving. And one of the reasons they're leaving is because they don't want to get conscripted to fight. And that's why in Ukraine, they're releasing prisoners from prison and they're giving them guns because there's nobody left to fight. You understand? It's all fake. It's fake. It's fake. The war for the West is fake. It's all about narrative and opportunity to create excuse and reason to do other things because of the war. But to the West, Ukraine is just a pawn, and you're being played, and you're support of them. I mean, isn't it funny how quickly the switch was flipped to go from one end of the world scenario to the next? All attention, full force, don't talk about anything else, just like that. And this is why Zelensky is becoming more vocal in his calling out of NATO, so to speak, for not helping him, right? Yeah, sure, they're sending him guns and ammo, but that's it. They're letting them fend for themselves. Otherwise, right, there's no boots. And of course, there never would have been, because that would have been a direct conflict with Russia, which would have escalated to a major, major war, which the West didn't want, right? The West is getting what it wanted, which is what we're living through. And we're about to get to the overall sum of this soon. But this is the context. And this is why Zelensky's coming out saying, look, what are y'all doing? Where's the help? I'm begging you for help. And he's not going to get it. Okay, and he never was. He got duped. They all did because they were just puppets. They were installed puppets in the Ukrainian government by the West to serve a means to an end. Do you understand? Okay, so what's the skinny and what's the rub? Where are we getting to? Here it is. The central banks of the world, especially in Western countries, are in an impossible situation. They have kept interest rates so low for so long in response to prior crises. You had 2008, among many others. It's its own episode. That the entire system, which, by the way, we are in a debt-based system, has taken on so much debt that was so cheap that if you were to raise rates to any meaningful level, the interest payments on the debt would exceed our national income, okay, our GDP. So what does this mean? It means that when measured inflation is 7.5%, which, by the way, they say inflation is the highest it's been in 40 years at 7.5%. Of course, if you go back 40 years to when it was 15% and measured inflation the same way that we used to measure it 40 years ago, inflation is actually still 15%. So, at bare minimum, this tells you that the Fed would have to raise rates to a minimum 7.5% to 15% to even attempt to fight inflation. If you get to 3 or 4%, you're already done. We have too much debt. It's impossible. So what does that mean? It means that it doesn't matter what the Fed does, it loses. It is literally impossible to raise rates at a level high enough to actually fight inflation without defaulting on debt and just collapsing the entire economy. It's also impossible to keep rates low because if you do, inflation will turn into hyperinflation. You understand? So when you understand all of this, it starts to become clear, well, we need a narrative. We need a way out. Because if you think for 5 minutes that the people responsible for the financial situation that we're in are going to be held accountable for what we've done, you are a fool. Of course, it will happen that gives them an excuse to get out of this mess. All right. So now you're looking at the door. This is the window of opportunity to create policy and excuse for the consequences of where we put ourselves. Something has to be done about the debt. And so for me, this is why this war was easy to actually see coming. And this is part of why I'm making the show, is because I want everybody else to learn how to see things coming too. And the way to do that is to learn how to read the narrative. Okay. Because once you understand the narrative, you understand the plot. All right. And then it becomes easy to predict. So I've been telling people, once the Federal Reserve acknowledged in public out loud that they were fighting inflation, that was it. That was the signal. That's how you knew that something was coming. All right, because there is no way that these people are going to accept responsibility for the things that they've done. So that's how you knew a way out was coming. And that's what this war is. That's why we goaded Putin into doing this, because we knew he would. And now we have our excuse. So what's next? Where does this all end up? Well, what I've been positioning for about 5 years was option number one. And up until now, that's been the only option I've ever seen. But I'm willing to admit and consider that it might actually go another way. Option number one is that they don't actually raise rates in a meaningful way. What happens is, they come out and they raise rates, and maybe you get to 2% or something like that. And then that's when I always anticipated the quote unquote excuse coming that allowed them to turn around and go the other way, right? And just essentially kick the can down the road, keep the status quo alive, and buy them even more time to see if they could figure out some other way out of this, right? Option number two is that actually, what if they use this to go ahead and let it all fall down, because they know in their hearts, and maybe they've already capitulated, that there is no way out, because there's not. It's mathematical certainty. It's not a matter of opinion. It's just how numbers work. There is no way out. At some point, the whole house of cards has to fall. And so what if this is their intention, is to use this as the excuse to go ahead and let it fall? And with the advent and awareness of things like the Great Reset, it's becoming clear that perhaps this is the way out. We're going to touch on that next time, perhaps. But for right now, we're going to stop here. I just wanted to give you kind of a crash course on the nonsense coming out of Russia and Ukraine in the East, because it's all propaganda. You have to understand that Russia's putting out propaganda too, okay? And everybody is. But that doesn't mean that we're not, especially to our own people. I mean, there is massive, massive precedent for this. I mean, I don't know if you've been alive the last couple of years, but this is just how it works. So there's no reason to believe them now. I mean, it's the same thing. And once you learn how to see this stuff, it becomes obvious when it happens. And I can assure you, it's all narrative and it's all propaganda. So keep your wits about you and try your best not to be fooled, because the times ahead of us are going to be extraordinarily difficult.